Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Cloud Architects Podcast. I'm Chris Gleason, and I'm joined once again by my my co-host and partner in crime, the ever dapper Nicholas Blank.
I love the dapper. I was waiting for another superlative or maybe something even worse to pop out of that, Chris, because there was that little pause. And I'm still in a very cold part of the world. It's still winter in Cape Town. The city is beautiful, however, it is cold, and I'm not enjoying the end of winter. I don't know how you're doing in your part of the world.
It's actually, our weather's amazing. I wish the weather would stay like this because it's pretty awesome right now. I'm sure our guest has some great weather. Pretty hot probably over there. Before I introduce him, I got to say I've known him for about 10 years now at this point. I think time flies, and I still reckon he's probably one of the hardest working people in tech. And so I'm very, very excited to have Joe Flynn join us today. Joe, welcome to the show. And for those who don't know who you are, do you mind just giving us a quick intro of kind of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so Joe Flynn, I'm actually one of our directors at Insight Over Modern Workplace. I've been in the industry, the technology field, it feels like forever, right? Like a dinosaur if I went and talk to my kids, right? In that sense. But lately we concentrate on new technologies, new solutions and offerings that we can kind of bring to market. Like what's the latest and greatest? A lot of times we do concentrate on from a Microsoft standpoint, but you always have the other behemoths in the room if you think of VMware, Apple, Samsung, and all those types of vendors. It's fun. I enjoy it. I love the technology. That's what keeps me into this.
Yeah, fair enough. I think we all of us dinosaurs are still here because we love the technology, right? We were talking to Michael Van Orenbeek in our last or next to last episode, and he mentioned as well that when they have problems with on-premises services or software these days, the team referred to them as dinosaur problems, and they need a dinosaur to help fix them. So I think we're all kind of there, and I think that's probably it's the reason why we're excited to have you on the show and talk about kind of the modern way of doing things, right? Because I think we've been talking a lot about how we used to do things, right? Sort of the long tail of previous best practices, how we used to manage AD, how we used to manage things. And one of the things I think that's probably had some changes in recent times is at the endpoint, right? Because we've gone from this place where, perhaps we were doing imaging, a lot of organizations were still doing imaging before the pandemic, and then everyone's run off to work from home. Some people are going back to the office. Some people are settling into this kind of hybrid mode, but we still have to manage those endpoints, right? And kind of what are we doing with these things today? Are we actually managing them? Are we working BYOD? And we thought, it'd be really good to talk to someone who's super passionate about, management and the endpoint side, kind of to kind of help dig into it with us. So I guess the first question that I had for you was, where are we at? What is the state of endpoint management today? Because I know, obviously we can talk a little bit about the future and sort of the art of the possible. But where are we at it today? Are we seeing most organizations adopting some form of sort of endpoint management at the moment or today?
Yeah, I think I'm going to say that dreadful word pandemic, because I think we're all sick of hearing it. But I think that kind of was a catalyst to get people to drive faster to modern management. And I think now we're in the influx of many smaller customers have adopted the modern management side. I think many larger customers are still in that, do I do it? Do I not do it? And if I do it, how do I do it? But we are starting to see our larger customers and larger, from a user count perspective, start saying, I have to go that direction. How do I get there, right? What's the best practice? Because what we're finding is, like a dinosaur, right? Many people who've been in the role for 15, 20, 30 years, I'm like that in some ways. I'm set in my ways, right? How I do things is, hey, this is it. This is easy. I don't have to worry about changing anything. But that's not you can't attack it like that because of the cloud technologies or modern way of doing things. It's different, right? It's new. There's efficiency. So how we've done things the past 15, 20 years, definitely not the same how you want to do it today or tomorrow, right? That's hard.
So where do you go at this point? I think, because I mean, if we do take a step back and look at, 10 years ago, what were folks doing? We were doing SCCM or whatever it was called 10 years ago, right? And if you were really advanced, you were probably doing some sort of imaging where you had a fleet of devices that were all exactly the same, and you were pushing a known image or a known good image, gold image, whatever you wanted to call it, to those devices, and everyone was getting sort of an image laptop. All of this stuff was being done on premises. If you needed your device re-imaged, or if you needed a new device, you would run down to IT, and they'd either give you another one, or they would reboot it for you and kick off that process. That sounds about right? We were about 10 years ago in this. Or
yeah, I would say I'll just give you a story. Figure 15, maybe a little over 15 years ago. I remember maybe 20 years ago, setting up Riz. I don't know if you remember Riz, but it was Microsoft's remote installation server, and I remember being so excited how we had, because we were a national company with locations everywhere, so it wasn't as easy. System Center at that time didn't have the true capabilities of imaging, and we were all excited because we set up Riz and we set up DFSR, right? DFS and then DFSR to replicate the images so that people were pulling locally. We're like, this is awesome. It was working well. And now I'm thinking back, I'm like, God, that was disastrous. It was so much work to maintain. And I think that's what we are today. And System Center is the same. I tell customers all the time, and I'm sure I aggravate people and I push buttons, but I think, honestly, System Center is a dead technology. You give it, I'm sure people are not going to like that, but you give it 5 or so years. You see the shift that Microsoft's made over time across all their technologies, Exchange, SharePoint Online. You look at Skype to link Skype to Teams. These paths to the cloud, these hybrids are met short term. They're not met long term. If you look at the technologies from a System Center perspective, more and more things are being developed and brought to the cloud first. And then it kind of seems like an afterthought of, do we bring it to System Center? Do we not bring it to System Center? And I think people have to start realizing that, right? That technology, you got to shift. You got to move forward in some time. And now's the time to really consider doing it.
Nick, I think you had a question before I spoke over you.
No, not at all. So, we're talking about the stuff that we cared about 10 years ago, and roll out the dinosaurs. And one of the dinosaur rollouts, of course, that we cared about was Active Directory. And we used to do a lot of stuff and management and GPOs in Active Directory. And to be fair, a lot of our enterprise customers still do. And I'm trying to think about 3+ projects on the go at the moment, where customers, both larger and small, are asking us to switch off on-premises Active Directory and go native Entra ID, or formerly known as Azure Active Directory. And then Microsoft goes ahead and releases the Windows Insider preview downloads on the quiet for the last few months on Windows Server 2025, which means that Active Directory is going to be with us until at least 2035, depending on how long the support life cycle is for that version of Windows. We've seen it be shorter for other enterprise products like Exchange. So this dinosaur technology is still going to be with us for a while, and that means we are still managing endpoints. We're still managing authentication and authorization on premises, and we all have customers with significant data center estates that just can't be switched off, and they still need to figure out how do we manage them. So in that vein, Joe, dinosaur, another 10 years of Active Directory support at minimum. What does that do to your thinking of managing endpoints and managing technology in general?
Yeah, I think Active Directory is probably the exception to my previous analogy, right, of like a System Center and Exchange. Every large company has it. There's no real true cloud solution, I would think. Entra is that cloud solution, but I don't think it's on par with what's required from an on-prem perspective. Think about how difficult it still is to have your identities come from the cloud back to on-prem. It's capable, right? There's ways you can do it, absolutely, but they haven't made that a seamless transition. If I'm looking at Active Directory from an endpoint perspective, my point is get them off of Active Directory. I think drive the endpoints cloud first, because most companies who require Active Directory are going to be synchronizing their accounts anyway, so you still have your authentication from the cloud back to the on-prem resources. And a lot of customers are like, well, that's not possible. And there's one main caveat I could think of off the top of my head is device-based authentication to Active Directory. I think that's the biggest gotcha there. But most customers, most people I speak to don't really do that. It's not very common. And if that's what you have, then no problem. You stay off-prem for a certain thing. But it's really uncommon to have someone say that's what they're doing and they rely on that. And so the roadblock to get their devices and end users more cloud-centric, it's extremely doable today, especially with cloud printing and all the other capabilities that have come forward. There's no reason to be on-prem for an endpoint and or a user in most cases.
Oh, yeah.
At least that I could find. Even from a security. You nailed it, though. And I think the GPOs are probably the hardest part for customers. Because think about how many GPOs some customers have. Like they've been around for years. And it's GPOs from XP to Windows 7 to Windows 10. And a lot of times, the good customers have migrated to the newer ways of doing things, part of the GPOs. The not so good are people who keep up to date or try and just leverage the same thing they created 20 years ago today. And I always tell people, I'm like, don't migrate them. Like, don't. I'm like, how it's done from a cloud perspective is different. Let's just document your requirements. Let's document how you want to do it, and let's set it up. You're moving to something new, right? You're moving to something new, great, modern. Let's set it up the same way, new, great, modern. Not let's drag what you have from the old and bring it to the new. But you nailed it. GPOs are probably the hardest part for most GPOs and applications. I think are the hardest part.
Enterprise complexity and GPOs. Sorry, Chris. Enterprise complexity and GPOs, I think, are probably the biggest sticking point, because they're like walking through a bunch of weeds, and you can never really get them off because we need them, right? Or it's kind of like PSTs are the cockroaches of the exchange world. Everywhere where you look, there's a PST hiding in a cupboard or in a drawer or on a hard drive somewhere, and then you've got this information management challenge. But from a GPO complexity point of view, I completely agree with you, where the tools that we have to convert those to Intune policies are okay, but they don't do like for like. And I completely agree with you that we actually have to re-envision how do we manage in cloud, as opposed to think that we have this straightforward analogy of being able to translate a GPO into an Intune configuration item. Chris?
Look, I agree with that. I think the challenge is it's also rethinking your requirements, right? Because I think that's part of the conversation. Because very often, organizations want to carry over something that they've been doing because it works for them, and so we've been doing it this way, so let's just convert that to whatever the new thing is. Well, you're managing machines in this way. Do you really need to manage them that way, or are there better ways to manage that particular configuration item or that thing that you're trying to lock down, right? Because a lot of the times, GPOs are there for locking down things, right?
Yeah.
I think orgs have largely moved away from using GPOs to deploy things. I'm sure we still find places where the GPO is it's the orchestration engine for scripts, right? Like that's how you get a script onto a machine, is by using a GPO. But for the most part, I think it's to lock down things. But we have better technologies now and other newer technologies that can help us lock down the endpoints with Defender and all these other things, depending on what we're doing.
And look at how we've done things, right? And I think you both said it. We started probably 80s, 90s, all the way back, right? Where everyone not everyone, but people had computers and they were able to do things. And it got to the point where, you have to lock everything down. You got to lock the desktop down. You can't write to this. We went to the extreme. And now over time, we've slowly shifted to where we're allowing people to do a little more with it. But now we're changing what we're focusing on, right? Now, a lot of times, at least today, right, we're focusing more on, I think a lot of, on my side is we're trying to focus on the identity and the data. 100% the device is still key, but I'd rather shift where I'm focusing on to make sure the user is secure, the data that I have from the company is secure, and the device is more just a piece of equipment or a tool to access that data via the identity. So I think how we do things, why we do things have shifted drastically over the years. And we're now at that point where many people, you look at group policy, you nailed it, right? We lock things down, every little thing. I'm going to set this one configuration because it's going to lock this down that no one's ever going to touch, but I'm going to set it anyway. And that sits there in an environment for 20 years. And then people don't realize what's even there.
Yeah. I mean, one of my first consulting gigs was, I want to say it was 2000 or 2001, and Windows Server 2000 had just come out with Active Directory and group policy, right? Had just come out, and I built a domain for this internet cafe that I was kind of contracting to at the time, and man, we went to town. Like, you could not do anything on that machine because it was an internet terminal that people, random strangers, could walk up to it and surf the internet. Right? So we wanted to make sure that they couldn't do anything. You couldn't right-click the desktop. You couldn't do anything. But I mean, it was literally all it could do is run a browser. That was it. But yeah, we don't need to be that locked down these days. And I like what you said, Joe, because ultimately we should be treating the devices to an extent as untrusted, right? Because, you know, as long as we're providing the service that is the data and the identity, then we can authorize and we know who's accessing stuff. Now, yes, sure. Can we build additional layers of security into that workflow with, you know, do we know the device? Sure, it's not multi-factor or whatever. I get that. But I think we still do seem to find in the industry, we have these, this sort of, fallback to let's lock down the device, right? Because hell, if I prevent that person from running PowerShell on their device, then you know what I mean. Like, we're never going to leak any data secrets, right? Whereas I think the focus, as you said rightly, I think is if we focus on making sure that the folks who need access to it have access to it, and we can verify that this is the right person accessing the stuff. And two, if the data is, you know, of a classification that it needs to be protected, let's protect the data. Let's not worry about, you know, locking down. And I've been seeing a lot of this lately because I've been working with customers, shall we say, in segments where this is still the norm, right? Machines are, and I feel like to do my job sometimes I have to come up with clever ways to be able to, you know, get files to myself. Sometimes it's, you know, it's not always the way to go. So
you are shadow IT.
But that's how we are our own worst enemies when it comes to that, because we can't treat our users as folks who don't know anything, right? Not that we necessarily ever have, but I think we're in a time and a place now where we have folks coming into the workforce and their computer literacy is higher than it's ever been, right? They're not coming into the job to learn how to use Word and Excel. By the time they start employment, most of them are already very, very comfortable with computer use and, you know, how to find ways around things and how to use password managers and how to use these things because they are having to do it in their personal lives, right? It's a little bit different to when we first kind of got to this place where we had to lock everything down. So we're our own worst enemies because when we put these sort of obstacles in the way, folks they're gonna try and find ways around it because they needed to be able to do their jobs, right?
Starts as kids. I know my kids do it. I mean, we have applications on their cell phones and they're young, right? But just to make sure they're doing the right things, you turn off apps, and sure enough, they find ways around it. Every time I find out, I'm like, again. But yeah, they're smart.
Yeah. Well, I can
motivated.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine the conversations around your dinner table when it comes to like your home network, because I can imagine, you know, your kids all have, you know, perfectly imaged autopilot machines or whatever.
I wish that's the case. It's not.
No, so that's pretty funny. So, Joe, what I wanted to, and I'm glad you brought that up because I also think that the whole let's protect the data and the identity speaks to allowing folks the choice of the tools that they like, right? Instead of saying you have to use Windows, it has to be a Dell and it has to, you know, have this build and this version of Office. Well, if I like to use a Mac, but I could access and consume the data in a secure way, why shouldn't I be allowed to use that, right? And I think, you know, there's the definite trend with organizations saying, well, we need to lock down our environment, so you have to use Windows. The question I wanted to ask you is, what are you seeing as far as organizations allowing the BYOD on the desktop, or, you know, for when I'm not talking mobile devices, right? BYOD for your laptops and devices like that versus, you know, corporate issued hardware versus something like W365. Is there specific use cases for them, or what are you seeing?
I wish BYOD would kick off more than it has. I think in most larger companies or just enterprises in general, it hasn't. I still think there's that trust factor where, hey, I own the machine, I control it. I think it's a control thing. I think what I am seeing, even where I am now, right? We've adopted Windows 365 as that BYOD play. So for instance, like in our company, when we hire someone, they have the choice. They can get a company issue laptop, or they can do BYOD and get a Windows 365 play. I think that is a clever way to do it, because granted, we all have mobile phones, we all can access email and things like that through conditional access, and we have man policies you can do and all that stuff. But then if you have to access on-prem resources that may require a VPN or legacy things that are on-prem, Windows 365 is a slam dunk there, because now you're managing a machine that you're never going to have to refresh for the most part, right? You don't have to worry about the hardware. You're ultimately just worrying about the OS, right? You're worrying about the OS, the apps, and then you can lock it down. People can't copy and paste how they do it. They can access it from any device. So if you wanted to get that granular, like a typical VDI scenario, if you think in the financial or healthcare industries where they have to be very secure, it's a good way to do it from a BYOD play. But I think if I look at what's capable today in the modern way, there's no reason why most people can't use a BYOD device and still as a company be secure. I mean, I can do rights management on the data. I can do conditional access. I can do MAM even from a Windows device. I mean, so I just think the lack of control, no different than if you think of back when Office 365 kicked off, right? What was most of the pushback? Oh, it's not in my data center, right? Or I can't fix it, or I can't do this. It's always I can't. Now people are realizing, I don't want to do it. Let's be honest, right? Put it in the cloud, let them worry about it. I'll be a consumer of it. And I think that's where we're at in the early days of the Microsoft 365 cloud, where the loss of control of the data and what you can do is the same where we are at BYOD today. I think the technology is there. We can 100% adopt BYOD. It has to be done smart. But I think there's technologies where we can lock down the data, the user, what device it's being used on, make the device a commodity at the end of the day. Shouldn't matter the device I use, if it's a Mac, if it's an iPad, Android, Windows. But on the flip side, if you are to that industry where you need tighter security, tighter controls, I think a Windows 365 is a good play, because you can access it from anything.
And I must say, I personally, I've been using Windows 365 for the last couple of weeks daily. And I mean, I use Teams with video, and it works very well. I mean, I was very skeptical with this whole situation of, you want me to, and I'll also say, I'm on a farm, right, where I'm using Elon satellites to connect, and so my internet connection is a little flaky sometimes, and it actually works really well. I have to give it credit. It works really well, because video has been great. You can barely tell. It picks up my Apple audio devices from my Mac, right, natively in there. And I haven't had a single issue with audio devices or anything like that. I've been really impressed, and I agree. I think it's a very viable solution for those types of environments. And I like the idea of BYOD. Here's your Windows image. We're going to give you the service, and you can consume your email and your Teams and your data through that. If you like that Alienware laptop and you want to connect using that, perfect. If not, we'll ship you a device and it's imaged and it's ready to go.
I mean, it's a cost factor too. I think that's what's going to hinder Windows 365 at the end of the day. Is for most companies, it's going to be cost. Because if you look at even 2 CPU 8 gig is probably in the mid $20 range per month, and so if you look at that across 3 years, probably equivalent to a laptop. But I guess it's a low end laptop if you look at it over 3 years. So I think you have to look at the price points of, and this is where I talk to customers all the time. What does it cost you for the forward logistics, to image the device, to even provision the device, get it to the user, the shipping, the day-to-day management, possibly at a hardware layer, warranty, break fix, and then the reverse logistics. I know we dispose of that device and not refresh it. That cost has to come into play, because I think that's where things like a Windows 365 definitely start looking better from a price point, because you're not worried about hardware at that point. you're literally just managing a device in the cloud.
Yeah, look, I don't know about other parts of the world, but I must say we've definitely had some challenges with hardware and getting hold of stuff, right? I think it's getting better now, but certainly there was a time, 8 months ago or whatever, where it was actually hard to find, equipment wasn't everywhere or readily available. Right now, fine, I can go into the local, I was going to use an American name of stores, but I've already forgotten. I can go to the local JB Hi-Fi here or whatever, or Dick Smith's, and I can pick up, a laptop. That's fine. But if I'm an organization and I'm onboarding, 300 or 400 seasonal workers, and I need to get all the 300 laptops, that may not be as easy to do. Right? So something like that, when you can just provision the machines and get them going pretty quickly, I can definitely see the value there.
And that's how it started out here. We were in the private preview for Windows 365. So we were I think we were one of the first 4 companies in the preview. And that's where the light bulb went in my head. If I had a new person get hired and they were a week out before getting their device. Mind you, we sell devices at that time, but this is a few years ago. Yeah. And so basically we're like, oh wait, we're in this preview. Let's take advantage of it and license the person for, at that time, Cloud PC, Windows 365, whatever you want to call it, it was then. And literally within 20 minutes, like, log in. Oh yeah, everything's here working. They were on the corporate network, right, through Azure. But literally then once they got their device, they're like, do I need this? That's what they said to me. Do I need this? I'm like, no, not really. And that's where it's like, this makes sense, right? It's starting to come together.
Yeah, fair enough. What about when we think about sort of Intune and managing devices today? We talked about the security controls and stuff, which I think Intune is very, very capable of, right? Windows devices, obviously, all day long, we know that works. I mean, I would say that I think even on Mac devices today, where Intune does a very good job of being able to manage those machines. Do we still need to look at third-party products like Jamf or other things like that to do management on Mac devices, or do you think Intune is kind of where it needs to be?
I'm gonna get in trouble here, but I mean, I think if once a company shifts to modern, I like the CYOD play. So kind of like Chris, what you said earlier, it doesn't matter. We can manage your device, any of those devices, using the same methodology, same framework, and the same platform. I don't need multiple platforms. Like, I think the common thing you see about customers that haven't modernized today, they may have Jamf for Mac, they may have Workspace ONE for mobile, they have System Center for Windows. That's common in a company for the most part that hasn't tried to either consolidate or try to shift to a modern way of doing things. I think Intune is definitely, in the US side, Intune's winning the battle across the board. Like, we see it. They were smart with the licensing, and let's be honest, if we look at the past year and a half, 2 years, the feature parity has been, it's par. If I look at Workspace ONE and Intune, it's going to be hard to find a feature that both don't do, maybe in a different way at that point. Jamf, if I'm looking from a Mac specific, there may be those little things that Jamf does better still, but I always have to question the customer. Are you using that? Like, first time, a lot of times customers ask, well, give me a feature matrix. I mean, not getting into this feature matrix conversation because there are so many features and it changes on a weekly, monthly basis. What do you use? Because I guarantee you, if I give you 3,000 features, you're probably leveraging a few hundred capabilities. So I see people shifting and consolidating, whether it is Intune or Workspace ONE. Those are the two big ones in the room. If you look at like a Gartner chart, I do see people shifting. Now the question is going to be, where is Workspace ONE going long term with Broadcom? I think that's what everybody's really wondering.
Well, you could only look at the semantic AV
Correct.
acquisition to kind of determine where that might end up. But it's a good point. It's a very good point. I had something very profound that I was going to say about that, but I've completely forgotten. So I may have a Nick just.
If I look at Jamf, I think the one thing Jamf has going for it now is Jamf Connect for a Mac. If a customer wants cloud-based authentication at the login on a Mac device to leveraging Azure, like Jamf Connect works really well, right? Because now I can tie it to an Azure login, and if the person's I don't have to worry about password synchronization or anything like that. It just automatically will use Azure as its login mechanism You have sudo access with other Azure accounts. You can set up an admin group, things like that. That works. It works really, really well. I mean, I'm
we have that. I was going to say, we have that in Azure AD now too, don't we? It's SSO for Mac or macOS.
It's a little different, but
okay,
yeah, it's getting there. It's not where the Jamf Connect is, but yeah, absolutely. Microsoft is 100% driving that direction. Now so again, it goes back to your question: is Jamf needed long term? That's a hard conversation, right? Because I think it's hard to me to talk to an enterprise customer and be like, hey, you buy this. This is everything it's capable of. Let's say we'll use Intune. It could be Workspace ONE. It doesn't matter. But you know what? I'm going to try to sell you something that's $5 to $10 more per month just for these devices. First question I would even ask you if I was a CFO or a CXO is, do I need it? Like, can I just do it over here since I'm already paying for the licensing? That's a common conversation, really common. So, and we're starting to see more and more large enterprises start thinking about making the shift. Can I consolidate? Can I get everything into one place? Because from a supportability, licensing, everything, it's just easier long term.
Yeah. What I was going to say with your comparison sort of example that you made is I get that a lot with sort of EOP and then Mimecast and Proofpoint, right? It's something I get customers saying to me very often. It's like, can you give me a feature comparison between the two? I was like, no, that's the wrong question. The right question is, what are your requirements? Let's see how each of those things can meet your requirements, right? Because guaranteed, like, it's tit for tat at that point. It gets really difficult. The one problem I've always had, specifically with Jamf, is with Intune, the barrier to entry is almost none, right? You buy a license on your credit card, and you can go and play around with it. You can go and deploy it, and you can get up and running. Jamf, I don't know if they have now, but they never had an easy way for an organization to try it out or to go and have a trial of the service or whatever. It always involves having to call them, get someone to call you back. Then you have to discuss this whole thing about how big you are and whether, and I've always felt like that type of sales cycle has been very troublesome or cumbersome to trying to get your hands on a product, right? If you're an organization and you're trying to do a compare between the two, and you want to, throw some stuff up in a lab, why would you go through that whole rigmarole when you may not actually be able to give them a sale? I've always kind of found that to be a little bit difficult.
That's specifically for most smaller companies, though, right? They want that contact to be able to hook you and try to sell you more. Where bigger companies have the flexibility of the cost to say, do a trial. If you buy it, great. If you don't, we have plenty of other people that are probably
we don't care. We have 30 million other people. Yeah, no, I totally understand that. I think that I can understand both sides of that sort of coin, I guess. But I, just from what I've seen or come up with in the past. So,
a question to Joe on terms of what are you seeing out there with customers making decisions around management friction? And both of you have touched on this. So, talking about Intune versus something else, and talking about EOP or any one of the defenders versus anything else, and having that view of Microsoft growing up out of the garage, going from it's okay to it's good enough to, it's in the Magic Quadrant and it's actually above everyone in the Magic Quadrant. But there's still the perception of what customers think that Defender isn't capable of versus, it's all in the same console, right? So Joe and Chris, what are you seeing out there in terms of management friction and customers' perception?
I think you nailed it. People are still stuck in the days of, hey, I don't know, Microsoft's not a security company. When if you look at how much money they spend in R&D there, it's a ton. Wish I made that money. I think I tackle it the same way Chris commented, is what are your requirements? And then let's determine if your requirements drive you to a specific direction. And if they don't, then I start where's the more larger value, right? Because if I look at the Microsoft side and the bundled SKU, it's the ecosystem approach that everything fits in together nicely, versus if you look at 5-10 years ago where everyone used to do the best of breed is a disconnected solution today, right? So it's harder. You may have great tools here from a best of solution, but they're not going to integrate with where your users are sitting and what your users are using on a day-to-day basis. So, I mean, outside business requirements don't drive it. And if depending on what they already own, then it goes down to ecosystem integration and how does it all work together is where I tend to drive the conversations.
And where do you want to go, right? If you talk about ecosystem and integration, well, how are you collecting and analyzing that logged data? Are you using Sentinel? Because if you are even considering Sentinel, it just makes absolute sense to stay within that Microsoft ecosystem versus yet another siloed solution, right? Oh, well, we have Splunk. Okay, well, that's another siloed solution that you're just tacking on. So I think that makes a lot of sense. But I agree with what Joe said. I think we're always going to find folks who think that Microsoft is only there because they should only be producing Windows and producing Office, and that's it. And everything else, is just them dipping their toe in the water. Which I think the reality is, from a security perspective, we've joked about this a lot on the show that they're probably the largest security vendor in the world, right? Because of their R&D spend and stuff like that, and all over the place. I mean, I think when they want to be, where they want to play, they tend to be very aggressive to get to where they need to be. I think we're going to see, if you look at AI and all of the sort of the fuzziness and fuss around that at the moment, right? I think that's that's the next step.
So it's only going to make it worse. I think the AI stuff, harder.
Hey, there's a Copilot for Copilot at this point, right? so yeah, no, I agree. So Joe, I think we talked a little before we came on, before we hit record, we talked about sort of the art of the possible, right? If you're talking to a customer that is basically 100% greenfields, they're setting up a company and they have zero today, what do you tell them? Like, where's the cool stuff and where should they be spending their dollars and looking at?
Yeah, even if they're greenfield or not greenfield, I think the cloud first approach is still the right way. I'm looking at it from an end user endpoint side. It just makes sense, right? Because users now, like we said it before too, we all work differently. Some of us travel, some of us don't travel as much. None of us are probably in an office ever, and that's changing for some users. But at the end of the day, I mean, the cloud first makes it easier to any device, any app, anywhere can be managed, can be supported, can be secured. Right? That's how we ultimately have to look at it in that sense. But I mean, outside of a cloud approach, I think if I'm looking at what's big for greenfields, and then you're probably, I'm curious to see the smirks on both of your faces. It's the AR, VR stuff to me is where companies are really starting to look at. You may think, that's not going to happen. And you look at the industry and the tech, it's like that metaverse is dead. But we have customers. I mean, we see the technologies going quickly. I mean, look at Microsoft. Like they're supporting HTC now and HTC and Intune. There's that RealWear in Intune, Quest in Intune. The HoloLens, obviously, in Intune. Workspace ONE does all the same. So everyone's starting to get to the point where it's almost not quite day zero for these devices, but it's getting to where they're mainstream supportability, all these tools at the same time, no different than a regular endpoint. But the capabilities of what you can do, I think, for instance, my own team, we host 2 meetings a week in VR. And then once people get over the cartoonish of an avatar, because I have dreadlocks, which I always wanted hair, and it was the only place I could get it. It's very interacting. I mean, it's a different experience, and some love it and some don't. But I think that's, if you see where it's going, where the Apple Vision Pro is announced, where that's going to go. Apple, I think, always is going to change the industry when they announce something, and they always do, right? Back in 2007 when they announced the iPhone. So I think it'll be interesting where it goes. But from a greenfield, it'd be cloud. Cloud smart though. I mean, because you got to worry about costs, especially if you're greenfield. But I wouldn't touch on-prem if I had to. Just to me, on-prem, from my stance, from a modern work perspective, is dead. It's legacy, right? It just so holds you back. It's technical debt. There's so many better ways to do things and better experiences from a cloud-first approach.
And really, I mean, at this point, if you're using an application that doesn't support, OAuth or being able to federate with Azure AD for its authentication, whether it's an on-prem, well, I assume it would be an on-prem app if that was the case. You should be asking, what is my app vendor doing, right? Because, unless you've written your own application. I'm working on a very large project at the moment where we're uplifting a very custom, very large application, so that it can, we can take it from on-prem data centers and put it in the cloud and make it work with Azure AD and all of these things. there's a lot of work involved in that, but it can be done, right? So I think there's, you should be asking other questions if you find yourself in that situation where you're on-prem because of one app or because of a suite of applications that don't support the cloud. Yeah, you should be really looking at those, because I think that's holding you back.
Agreed.
I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you, except for companies that have got significant OT type of investments that can't go to cloud. We think of energy producers, we think of hospitals. You don't want that MRI machine to be run out of a cloud-based service that doesn't have a guaranteed connection, right?
It's never going to happen. Those things all run on Windows XP. We all know that. So
it's true. It's true.
But I also think those are specialty devices, right? I wouldn't consider those end user devices. And even if I look at in the gas industry from an OT perspective, someone may be sitting at that terminal, but that's a very specific terminal in an OT world. I agree with you. You're probably going to have a system center on-prem in its own little locked-in area that's not going to have connectivity outside world. And that's the right choice for those, because I don't think you're ever going to get something as secure as a lockdown environment.
It's probably going to be a TFTP server, and that's it, because let's be real.
Wow.
It's probably really old. No, but we joke, but yeah, a lot of the OT stuff is a lot of that stuff is pretty old technology. You're better off not getting it anywhere near the internet. Otherwise, weird things and bad things will happen.
Bad things will happen.
Right. Well, I guess just looking at the time here, I know you guys have got probably things to get on with you, Dave. So, Joe, before we leave you, is there anything you want to sort of plug, or any sort of words of wisdom you'd like to leave the listeners with as we sort of close out the episode?
No, like I said previously, I work for Insight. So, we're a global SI company. I live these technologies. So if I look at modern provisioning, like from an autopilot standpoint, if I tell you how many customers have adopted autopilot, it blows my mind. I've been in it since 2017, one of the main people for us here at Insight. And it's just crazy to see how many customers request it, how many devices are being enrolled, even from a pre-provisioning standpoint. And there's caveats. Microsoft has some things to do from a pre-provisioning, but everyone's adopting it. And if you're not, I think definitely customers have to start looking and just taking a step back, right? Don't look so narrow focused, but take a step back and think of the art of the possible, because there's so much possible with this new technology that you just got to embrace it and just let it make your day job easier, right? Make your day-to-day easier. More importantly, improve the employee experience across the board.
That's fair.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, right? Employee experience. We can't leave the users in the dark with this stuff, right? We have to keep them along with the journey with us as well.
The users are moving faster than most corporations, if you think of the consumer side, right? So they're way ahead already. So might as well embrace it.
Yeah, fair enough. Joe, just because I know you, what's your phone pick at the moment? Because I know you're big into your mobile devices. Just for interest.
I actually have the Surface Duo 2.
Okay.
I've had I had the Surface Duo 1, since Surface Duo 2. I tried the Samsung Flip. I had the Samsung Fold. I have the Google Pixel. I like the dual screen. I'm upset that it's probably it's dead, but I love the dual screen. I'm comparing the Samsung Fold to that. I think the form factor of the Duo works well for two apps, where I think the Samsung Fold is a little kludgy for my purposes. But I had to send it back for warranty, and I used the Samsung for about a week. I was miserable. I was so happy to get it back. But it's Android, so I'm definitely an Android person, whether it's my family's Galaxy phones. So definitely not an Apple phone person. I'm sure I'm a rare occurrence there from many.
Fair enough. Now, look, I got to say, I think that work profile on Android is one of the coolest and just most thought out things ever. I wish they would bring something like that to iOS. It would just be awesome to have that. But anyway.
Well, they are similar when it's tied to Apple Business Manager. The only downside is you need the identities synced at the same time.
Yeah.
But they have it's not a one-to-one versus the Android, but it's slowly getting there.
Yeah. Fair enough. Anyway, that was a different tangent, but I'm always curious because I know you love your phone. So, look, thank you so much for joining us. I think it's early your morning, is it? So really appreciate it. Well, probably not that early, but thank you for joining us. And yeah, anytime you want to come back, please please let us know if I'm happy to have you back.
My pleasure. This is fun.